The first thing anyone remembered was the silence. Not the gunfire or the sirens, or the radio hiss that filled Brooklyn most nights, but the sudden quiet that rolled across the FBI field office just after midnight. On the board, a dozen pager signals blinked red, each one tied to a Gambino runner somewhere in the borough. Then, as if a switch had been pulled, every light froze. The lines went dead. For the Bureau, silence was never peace, it was warning. Special Agent Frank Delaney leaned forward at his desk, coffee half cold, and watched the last signal fade. He had been tracking those pagers for 6 weeks through a private repair shop the mob used to pass coded messages. Now they were dark, all of them. The same hour a sealed warrant was scheduled to hit a stash house in Bensonhurst. Delaney glanced toward the operations room and saw only the blue glow of monitors on empty chairs. Somewhere outside, snow started to fall, thick enough to muffle the city. In the van across town, Technical Agent Carla Ruiz sat alone, headset pressing marks into her skin. Static filled the channel, but underneath it she thought she heard a pattern, a soft click that repeated every 3 seconds. She marked it on her pad, thinking it might be a malfunction, until she realized the pause between clicks spelled a word in Morse. Done. She whispered it once to herself, and the sound of her own breath startled her. The raid team was already moving. At 10:15, armored jackets converged on the address, but the house was empty. The floorboards were bare, mattresses still warm. Only a single beeper lay on the counter, its screen cracked. When Delaney picked it up, it buzzed once, flashed zeros, and died. He slid it into an evidence bag and tried not to let the weight of it mean too much. Back at headquarters, Ruiz ran the waveform through the analog decoder. Each pager had transmitted through a relay registered to a shell company called Bright Star Electronics. It looked like a family-owned parts shop in Queens, the kind that repaired radios and sold police scanners to truckers. But the invoices were all signed by the same hand, Vincent D'Amico, a low-level Gambino associate with a record full of nothing charges. Delaney had seen his name before in a report marked confidential internal. Someone in the bureau had redacted the rest. He drove to the shop at dawn, snow-crusted on his coat, and found D'Amico sweeping the sidewalk. The man smiled too easily. Inside, radios lined the walls, each tuned to a different hum, and behind the counter a row of pagers hung in neat plastic bags labeled repair. Delaney flashed his badge and asked for the owner. D'Amico said the owner had moved south for the winter, maybe Florida, maybe Jersey. He could not recall. The smell of solder and cheap coffee filled the room. On the back shelf a small TV played muted news, showing the tape outlines from last night's failed raid. Delaney leaned closer to one of the pagers, pretending interest. Its serial number matched one on the bureau list. He clicked it open, pretending clumsy hands, and saw a tiny crystal chip where no civilian unit should have one. Not a transmitter, a receiver. The shop was listening, not talking. He thanked D'Amico, left a card, and stepped outside into the thin morning light. In the car, he called Ruiz. The signal had not gone dead by accident. Someone had shut down the feed from the inside. Every pager the Bureau was tracing was mirrored by one in Gotti's network. For months the mob had been reading their surveillance logs almost in real time. The silence was not a blackout, it was a message. They already knew. By noon, the director ordered an internal sweep. Phones were checked, clearances frozen, files locked. Delaney watched as techs sealed off the operations floor with yellow tape, as if contamination could be contained by plastic. He thought of the faces on those pagers, small-time earners, drivers, couriers, all invisible until now. The Bureau had spent years listening to them breathe through static. and in one night they had vanished like ghosts. Ruiz kept replaying the clicks from the van, trying to find meaning in the noise. She noticed faint harmonics layered behind the Morse, like an echo bouncing from concrete walls. She fed it through the spectral analyzer and saw a waveform shaped like a heart monitor spike, repeating every second. When she filtered it down, the pattern matched the pulse of an old analog tape recorder. Somewhere in Brooklyn, someone had been recording them as they listened. Delaney's superior, Assistant Director Keller, called him into the glass office and shut the door. He said the Bureau was treating the incident as a possible breach. Delaney would be lead investigator, but he was to report only to Keller directly. No paper trail, no inter-agency memos. Keller slid across a plain envelope unmarked. Inside was a single photo, black and white, surveillance shot of D'Amico loading crates into a truck behind Bright Star Electronics. The date stamp read 2 days before the raid. Delaney returned to Queens that night, parking across from the shop. The street was quiet, except for a dog barking behind a fence. At 11:20, a van pulled up, same model as the Bureau's field units. 2 men stepped out wearing city maintenance jackets, no patches. They entered through the rear door, carrying what looked like tool cases. 15 minutes later, the lights inside flickered and died. Delaney crossed the street, badge ready, but by the time he reached the back alley, the van was gone, and the air smelled faintly of ozone. He pushed through the door and found the room stripped bare. Workbench empty, shelves cleared, dust still floating in the flashlight beam. On the counter lay a single beeper, blinking faintly, battery almost dead. He pressed the button, and instead of numbers a sentence scrolled across the screen. Not who you think. Ruiz met him at the field office at dawn. They replayed traffic cameras, no record of the van, plates unregistered. Keller ordered silence, told them to log it as equipment theft. Delaney refused. He took the beeper to the lab, opened it under magnification, and saw an inscription etched into the circuit board, RAVN06. No manufacturer mark, just those 5 letters and a number. He typed them into the internal database and found nothing. He tried the Bureau's secure archive, and a result flashed for half a second before vanishing. Access denied by request of Counterintelligence Division. For days, whispers spread through the office. Someone said Raven was a code name for a classified surveillance program that predated modern digital monitoring, a partnership between the Bureau and the National Security Agency, NSA, during the early 80s. Others said it was Gotti's own surveillance network run through retired technicians. Delaney did not know which to believe. He went home for the first time in 3 nights. The apartment felt too quiet. On his kitchen table lay a folded piece of paper. No envelope, no footprints on the floor. The handwriting was block letters, clean. Stop looking. Trust Keller. He sat down slowly, the note trembling between his fingers. Outside, sirens drifted like distant thunder. The next morning, Keller called him in again. The Bureau was shifting focus to the Gambino hierarchy, not the electronics leak. Keller said these things resolved themselves when higher targets fell. Delaney asked if Keller had authorized anyone to access the Raven file. Keller's eyes narrowed, then softened. He told Delaney to take some rest days. Ruiz refused to let it drop. She traced the residual signal from the last beeper activation to a relay tower near the Brooklyn waterfront. At midnight, they parked below the pier, antenna raised, listening through the hum of river air. A faint transmission pulsed once every 5 minutes, too weak to triangulate. Then a voice, distorted, male, speaking through static. "We hear you hearing us." Ruiz froze. Delaney leaned into the mic and said one word, "Why?" The reply came in a slow click pattern. Doan. Then silence again. The following afternoon, Internal Affairs agents entered their office. Both were placed on temporary leave pending an inquiry into unauthorized surveillance activity. Ruiz argued. Delaney stayed silent. As they were escorted out, he saw Keller watching from the mezzanine, face unreadable. 2 nights later, Delaney woke to the phone ringing once and stopping. He looked out the window and saw a car parked under the streetlight, engine running. He stepped outside in his coat, walked to the curb. The car pulled away without headlights, turning the corner slowly. On the pavement where it had idled, he found a beeper half buried in slush. When he pressed the button, it flashed the same word again. Done. Weeks passed. Officially, the case was closed, classified as equipment malfunction. The raid was rewritten as a false lead. Delaney filed his own report under a personal folder marked for future reference. Ruiz transferred to another division. Keller received a commendation for operational efficiency. But sometimes, late at night, Delaney still turned on the old receiver and listened to the static between stations. Once, faintly, he caught a click pattern repeating under the hum, a rhythm he had memorized. It spelled his name. He sat in the dark, headset humming against his ear, snow falling outside the window, just as it had that first night. Somewhere in the noise, another voice whispered through the bandwidth, quiet, confident, familiar. Then, one last word before the line went dead. Don't. And in that moment, he finally understood why it had to happen. Silence was never the absence of sound. It was the shape of what had been taken. The Bureau would move on, the city would wake, and the Gambino family would keep breathing through walls. But for those who listened too closely, the echoes never stopped.